So now we're going to take this little application that we did, which creates a list of universities and where they are and which ones are the best, and allows us to add and remove items. And we're going to turn this from the sort of straight-ahead Vue application that it is now that loads into a div on the page with the ID of app, as is determined here. Instead of this, we're going to create a component that maps to a tag. We're going to create a tag called university list, and anywhere we plug that tag university list into our HTML, that application will appear with all its functionality fully working. So in order to do that, what we're going to do first is we're going to change this call that we have here at the beginning. Instead of v gets a new view, it was new view, right? Instead of v gets new view, we're going to change this, and we're going to call on the component method of the view object, which is what you use to initialize a component. And the first argument that it takes is essentially the name of the tag that you're going to create that maps to this little application. So now I've created a tag, a new component, and the tag is called university list, and that's the first step. Now we're still going to need to initialize view at some point with new view. We're going to do that at the end, but the component itself, this is how you define it. Now one of the things you don't need in the component is this element selector, because we've just determined it's going to be the tag called university list. Let me look at my notes. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a template. So we've got a data property here, and we have a methods property here. And what we're going to do is add a template property, which is a string. And basically, we're going to take all of this HTML that lives inside this thing, which is basically the UL and the form, and we're going to cut, and we're going to paste it into this string. Now you can see I've got a multi-line string here, and so that will throw an error in JavaScript because these lines aren't terminated correctly. If I want to continue, whoops, sorry about that. If I want to continue a string from one line to the next without having to, concatenate separate strings or something like that, I can use the backslash character. So if I just put at the end of each one of these lines a space and a backslash, you'll see, and the editor is showing me that it's working, we're creating one long string that happens to have, multiple lines. Now why is that one not showing up right? I don't know. Let's keep going and find out. It's probably just a quirk of the text editor. I apologize for making you watch me type these, but it is actually kind of instructive to see what you have to go through. Okay, so, oh, there we go, because I had another space after the. So we've just created a single string that combines all of this stuff. Pardon my dogs. I'm not sure if you could hear that, but if you could, pardon my dogs. We've created a single string that contains all the HTML that existed on our old HTML file, and now we've plugged it into the component itself. Now there's one other thing that's wrong with this. You can see that at the root level we have a UL and a form element, and one of the little gotchas with component templates is you have to have a single root element in your template. And we can achieve that by just basically wrapping the whole thing in a div. And that div exists for no other purpose than to contain everything in a single root element. So we've done that. Now what we can do, since we've decided we're going to create a new tag called university list, I'm going to go back to my HTML, and where all the rest of this stuff used to live, I'm just going to put in the tag university list, right? So we have now taken all the HTML, put it into the template, and taken this entire component and given it a place to live inside our original application. Now, the one other thing that we need to do here, well, if it's the one other thing, but the next thing we have to do here is change the data object. Instead of data just being a property, which is in this case an object literal, we have to turn the data object into a function. And this is just something you have to do when you're working with Vue components. And the function is simply going to return that same data object you started with, right? And what this does, and I have to close that function here. What this does is it creates a closure, right? We talked about closures earlier, and what happens with a closure essentially is we're creating the means for when this Vue component is set up, this code runs, and after this code is finished running, the context that it exists within is preserved. And one of the reasons this is done is so that you could have university list and you could have it appear 3 different times on a page with different data, and they would all be independent of each other because each one of them is contained by a closure. We'll actually take a look at that and see it work as we go. But okay, so I've turned my data into a function, and then the last thing we have to do on the bottom of this page, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, this is the end of our component. And this here is the end of our onload. So I've got one other thing I have to do. I still have to say new Vue, and this is L app, right? So I still have to tell, let me indent this properly. I still have to tell Vue to load into this div on the page. And by doing so, I'm making it excuse me, I'm making it so that any tags that are inside of there will be processed as components. If I put university list out here somewhere at the end, right before body or something, Vue won't see it because I didn't initialize it using this at the bottom. So with this all in place, technically, I should be able to go back to this page, reload it, and have everything work the same. And let's open up the console, because that's always a good idea. And let's see. Brown is in Providence, and it is also the best. I can add, I can remove, all this stuff still works. But because it's a component, as I said, pardon my dogs, I can say, let's do it again. And then add another university list. And when we come back to here, you'll see now there's 2 of them. And since I'm not seeing errors, I'll take that away. And I could change each one and have different data in each one. I could say Cornell is in Utica. And down here I could say that, give me another Ivy League. Princeton, which I'm going to assume is in Princeton, is here, right? So these 2 things have different data in them and are completely independent of each other, and I was able to simply add it multiple times by saying university list again. So you could imagine this being useful in a case where, you've got a shopping site and each product is a component. That is all it takes to create a component, a reusable component, in Vue.